Chapter 46. Boarding Battle at Sea. Bang, bang, bang. The deafening crashes exploded across the sea like thunder. The rams of Cago's fleet slammed into the sides of Quen's forward oarships like siege hammers. Sturdy oak planks groaned under the immense force, shattering, warping, and buckling inward in an instant. One medium-sized galley was struck so hard it nearly snapped in two, seawater pouring in as the hull keeled sharply to one side. The pirates of Jawbreak Island roared with bloodlust, brandishing axes and cutlasses. Like piranhas scenting blood, they clambered up the tilted hulls or swung aboard on hooked lines, swarming onto Quen's ships in a frenzy. The battle flared white-hot at once. The clash of steel, the dying screams, the rage-filled shouts filled the night. Quen's 1,000 pirate infantry, though drilled for half a month under Jorah, were quickly hard-pressed against the Jawbreak veterans, twice their number and twice as savage. The lines buckled beneath the brutal assault. If not for the Dragon Soul Guards, their silent, unyielding wall holding the worst of the enemy's charge and cutting men down with Valyrian steel, the defense would already have shattered. Quen drew the Valyrian steel sword at his waist, its cold blade glinting in the firelight. A pack of Jawbreak raiders spotted him as commander and charged with howls. A cold gleam flashed in Quen's eyes. Magic surged within him, flooding into the blade. The ancient runes etched along the spine flared to life, burning crimson. Whoosh! A fan-shaped wall of fire erupted from nothing. Quen swept his sword wide, unleashing the searing blaze like a living thing. It devoured the onrushing pirates in an instant. They had no time to scream. Their bodies twisted and blackened in the flames, filling the air with the stench of charred flesh. The fire raged on, licking up ropes and debris, casting a hellish glow across the terror-twisted faces of nearby raiders. Jorah Mormont, hacking through foes in his heavy armor, faltered midswing, staring in disbelief at the sight of Quen's sword, wreathed in flames of annihilation. Quen cut through the enemy like a war god of fire, his flaming blade carving a path of ruin. Pirates burned to cinders or hurled themselves into the sea, shrieking. He carved straight through their ranks and leapt onto the deck of another warship, leaving a trail of burning carnage behind him. As he was clearing the last resistance, a raw, thunderous bellow rolled across the battlefield, drowning out the din. For Jawbreak Island. Kill them all. Quen's head snapped toward the sound. On the deck of a massive double-decked galley, a hulking, barrel-chested figure swung a colossal axe like a beast unleashed. Every stroke sent blood spraying, bodies crumpling like stalks of grain before the scythe. Around him, the pirates of Jawbreak Island went wild, howling his name with frenzied devotion. Cago. 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 It was Cago. A cold killing smile curved Quen's lips. The chance was here. Without hesitation, he sheathed the flaming sword and drew the dragonbone bow from his back. Draw. Knock. Pull. The movements flowed like water. His will flared, and flames roared to life along the black arrowhead, burning fiercely. Twang. The bowstring cracked like a thunderclap. A blazing meteor streaked across the night, splitting darkness and sea alike. Death itself flew on its trail, straight for Cago's chest. On the opposite deck, Cago had just split a man in half with his axe, hot blood spraying across his face. And in that moment, a dread deeper than blood, like the gaze of some ancient beast, locked onto his soul. Every hair on his body bristled. His beast-like instincts saved his life in the final heartbeat. Cago never even saw the arrow clearly. Acting purely on instinct, he twisted hard at the waist with startling speed and strength. His left hand shot out like lightning, seizing the gaunt man beside him and yanking him into his path. Splutch. A faint but chilling sound of tearing flesh. The flaming arrow grazed past the outer side of Cago's left arm. The searing heat carbonized and vaporized the flesh in an instant, leaving white bone exposed. Agonizing pain tore a scream from his throat. But when his eyes fell on the man he had pulled in front of him, the scream broke off, replaced by terror and revulsion. A gaping hole, the size of a bowl, with smooth charred edges, had burned clean through the man's chest. The blast had incinerated his innards and bones the moment it struck. All that remained were scraps of blackened flesh and jagged rib ends smoldering with faint smoke and sparks, sizzling with the acrid stench of scorched meat. The man's face was still frozen in shock, but his eyes were already glassy, empty. Through the smoking cavity, Cago saw Quen standing tall on the opposite stern deck, bow in hand, death-made flesh. He glanced down at his own arm, blackened, burned to the bone, racked with stabbing pain. For the first time, sheer terror drowned the infamous shipbreaker. Retreat. Get the fuck out of here. His roar, sharpened by panic, turned shrill and broken. He no longer cared for the fleet or for victory. He scrambled and staggered toward the cabin, desperate to flee from the bow that had nearly ended him. The sight of their commander fleeing, combined with the charred corpse at his feet, its chest blown open, its eyes staring lifelessly, shattered the jawbreak pirates' will. They scattered like beaten dogs, leaping back onto their ships in a frenzy. Oars bit the sea with frantic strokes as the fleet swung about, fleeing toward Jawbreak Island. Behind them drifted only burning wreckage, bobbing corpses, and the foul reek of smoke and blood carried on the wind. Roro cut down a pirate too slow to escape, wiped the blood from his face, and rushed to Lo Quen's side. Lord, shall we pursue? Lo Quen slowly lowered the dragonbone bow. Watching Kago's flagship vanish into the fleeing mass, swallowed by the night, he shook his head. He was too far, the waves too rough. Even if he gave chase, his ships couldn't match their speed. And Kago, shaken and terrified, would surely scatter vessels to cover his retreat, leaving no opening. No. Order the men to clear the field. Gather the dead. Salvage what we can. We return to Torturer's Deep. His voice was hard as iron. This debt will be paid, sooner or later. The wind keened across the deck, fanning stubborn flames and carrying the thick stench of blood. A carefully laid ambush and counterambush had ended in Kago's ruin, and the shipbreaker fled maimed. But in the stepstones, the storm was only beginning to rise. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 50 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com/BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 47. The Plan. Torturer's Deep. The chill in the sea-carved hall was heavy, the air stagnant. Lo Quen stood before the vast stone wall map, his fingertips drifting absently across the reefs marked, tidal reefs. His voice was calm. What were our losses at the tidal reefs? Roro swallowed, his throat working. Lord, though we won in the end, the price was steep. 497 of Torturer's Deep's pirate soldiers were killed, more than 130 gravely wounded, and nearly every man bears some cut or scar. He stole a glance at Lo Quen's stern face before hastily explaining, Lord, Kago excels at ramming tactics. Many of our dead drowned when their ships went under, only to be picked off by his men with crossbows. Lo Quen gave a short nod. The pirate casualties were grim, but they weren't the true loss. He looked toward Jelena. She understood at once, answering in a low, steady voice, 73 Dragon Soul Guards fell. 73. In the corner, Jorah Mormont repeated the number to himself. He had seen countless battlefields, corpses piled like mountains, rivers of blood. Yet the fall of these silent warriors struck him harder than most. Clad in Valyrian steel armor, wielding Valyrian steel blades, the Dragon Soul Guards were the sharpest fangs and strongest shields of Torturer's Deep. Losing 73 of them was worth far more than the near 500 pirates. He snapped his gaze to Lo Quen, wondering how he would answer such a loss to his very core strength. Lo Quen's fingers, tapping against the sea chart, stilled the moment he heard the number. That night, Kago had brought over 30 oared vessels, 5 or 6 of them double-decked warships. In sheer numbers, the gap was staggering. Lo Quen's forces, even counting Roro's men, barely reached 2,000, with only 500 Dragon Soul Guards among them. Kago's pirates had numbered more than 3,000. Even with his ambush turned back on its maker, even with his flanking strike gaining ground, the imbalance of ships and men had cost him dearly. Jorah's month of drilling the pirates had done little, they were no real soldiers yet. Without the unyielding resistance of the Dragon Soul Guards, the losses would have been worse still. Lo Quen closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, every trace of feeling was gone, leaving only cold resolve. The ships. Kago fled in disgrace, abandoning 7 galleys still fit to repair. We hauled them back. Roro answered quickly, trying to soften the weight of the report. But our own losses. 4 medium galleys had their keels snapped clean, they're fit only for firewood. The abyssal stranglehold's damage runs deep into her frame, she'll need major work. The nest of the crab and the reefbreaker both had their hulls split on one side, their decks a ruin. They'll take time to mend. Lo Quen nodded, then turned. His gaze passed over Roro and Jorah, settling at last on Jelena and Janice standing silently in the corner. Jelena, Janice. Let's see the fallen Dragon Soul Guards. Lead the way. Jorah's doubts only deepened. He followed in silence, determined to see what Lo Quen intended. Roro trailed after them too, a thread of nameless fear in his gut. He already knew the sisters had the power to call the dead back once before. Deeper within the sea-carved caverns lay a vast, empty stone chamber. 73 bodies of dragon soul guards were laid in perfect rows across the cold floor, covered in rough linen shrouds. The stench of blood and the chill of death hung thick in the air. The cloth could not hide the wounds, horrific gashes, shattered armor. Death had stripped them bare, silent testimony to the brutality of the fight. Quen walked to the head of the line. Jelena and Janis flanked him, one to either side. Begin. Quen's deep voice echoed through the vast stone chamber. Jelena and Janis raised their hands in unison. Their slender fingers flared with halos of light. The temperature in the chamber spiked. Torches along the walls whipped and flickered, throwing grotesque shadows that writhed across the bodies draped in white linen. An indescribable aura spread through the air, as if a fissure to the realm of the dead had been torn open. Jorah Mormont froze, holding his breath, pupils shrinking sharply as he fixed on the nearest shrouded form. Roro staggered back a step in terror, his teeth chattering uncontrollably. He had known the sisters could raise the dead, but this was the first time he had seen the act itself. Beneath the linen, the rigid outlines of corpses twitched faintly, like a slumbering beast being stirred awake. Then the second corpse, the third. At bone-deep wounds, muscle fibers, splintered bones, even fragments of torn organs began to writhe and knit together under the halo's glow, as though pulled by invisible threads. Broken bones snapped back into place with grating cracks, torn flesh fused like molten wax forced to seal. The process unfolded in silence, yet carried a soul-shaking sense of reversal. Minutes later, the halos ebbed like a retreating tide. 73 dragon soul guards rose in unison. Their movements were stiff, inhuman, their gazes colder than before. Their scars remained, branded on their bodies like marks of war, making them even more fearsome. Wordless, they turned toward Quen and the sisters, as if they had never fallen. Fall back into formation, Jelena and Janis commanded calmly. The resurrected guards marched out with heavy, precise steps, their silence absolute. Only Jorah's ragged breathing and Roro's chattering teeth lingered in the chamber. A chill shot up Jorah's spine, cold sweat slicking the hand that gripped his sword hilt. This raw display of mass resurrection struck him like a hammer blow to the soul. Staring at Quen's terrifyingly calm back, he felt, for the first time, a fear that clawed up from the deepest reaches of his being. Was this power truly a gift from the gods? Beside him, Roro had gone pale, his legs trembling. At last, he understood why the guards were silent, why they felt no pain, why they fought without fear of death. They were walking dead. And in that shock, his loyalty to Quen spiked into fanatical devotion. Quen ignored their terror. After Kago returned wounded, what news from Jawbreak Island? Roro jerked as if waking from a dream, fumbling out a sheepskin sea chart. His voice quavered with reverence. MMY Lord. Our patrols near Jawbreak Island report that after Kago fled back, his left arm was ruined, just rotting flesh. He's broken in spirit, paranoid day and night. He has fewer than 30 seaworthy ships, all hiding in the main harbor like turtles. Meanwhile, the hidden shipyard on the western side of the island is working frantically under his orders, repairing ships as if mad, desperate to recover strength. Jorah drew in a deep breath, forcing down the storm of shock at what he had just witnessed. The Bear Island Knight's resolve and tactical instinct overpowered his fear. Lord, he said in a rougher, deeper voice than usual, Kago entrenched in the main harbor holds the terrain advantage. A direct assault will bleed as heavily. He jabbed a finger at the main harbor on the map, then slid it quickly to a smaller mark beside it, the shipyard. But his desperation to rebuild ships, that's his weakness. The shipyard lies apart from the harbor, its defense is weaker. That's where we strike. A feint will do the rest. A feint. Quen's eyes locked instantly on the mark. Send Roro with a fast fleet, Jorah said, pointing at the harbor, miming an attack. Make it loud, make it look like we've thrown everything into an all-out assault on the harbor. The greater the spectacle, the better. Kago must believe all our strength is fixed there and send every reserve he has to meet it. His finger tapped the shipyard again. Then you, Lord, lead the true fleet straight here. While his ships are still in dock, we crush them. Take what we can, burn the rest. If the shipyard falls, Kago is nothing but fish on the block, waiting for the knife. Quen stared at the mark, the shipyard, the glaring weakness. His eyes hardened. A sound plan. We'll do it your way. He turned to Roro. And you must sell the act. Don't let Kago glimpse the ruse. Driven by fear and fanatic zeal, Roro thumped his chest, eyes flashing with cunning and malice. Rest easy, Lord. Bluffing's what I do best. I'll scare Kago so bad he'll piss himself, with his eyes fixed only on the harbor. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 48, Faint to the east, strike to the west. Time slipped by in the shipyard of Torturer's Deep, where the air reeked of tung oil, rust, and tension. Craftsmen toiled day and night, their hammering never ceasing. A month later, the fleet stood renewed. The abyssal stranglehold, once battered and broken, now loomed proudly in the main berth. Its fractured keel had been braced with ironwood and clamped with massive bronze plates. Rotten ribs and planks were replaced with fresh oak, fitted tight as if grown in place. The hull was sheathed in layers of tung oil-soaked linen, forming a tough, waterproof skin. The deck had been relaid and polished smooth, sails swapped for heavy new canvas, and every rope replaced, taut and strong. 7 newly captured galleys had been added to the ranks, their prows tipped with polished bronze rams gleaming with cold menace beneath the torchlight. The repaired ships, their scars hidden beneath careful patchwork, looked ready to kill. Night descended like spilled ink, draping Torturer's Deep in shadow. The shipyard did not quiet, it roared louder, driving toward its final push. Torch-bearing craftsmen rushed about with last inspections and reinforcements, while sailors hauled barrels of fresh water, salted meat, hardtack, bundles of arrows, crossbow bolts, and stone shot aboard. The air rang with the clang of steel, the thud of boots, and the bark of harsh orders. Excitement and dread thickened the night, the kind of heavy stillness that always came before battle. In that darkness, Roro-Uhoris led his decoy fleet out first, their sails vanishing into the horizon with a clamor meant to be heard. As their noise faded, Torturer's Deep harbor fell into brief silence. But it was not the silence of calm, it was the last held breath before the storm broke. Shrouded in the midnight mist rising from the sea, Quen led the true fleet from the harbor in silence. With Jorah Mormont at his side, he guided the warships toward the hidden shipyard on Jawbreak Island's western shore. Jawbreak Island, main harbor. A weary sentry rubbed his bloodshot eyes, squinting at the pale horizon. The wind off the sea carried salt, and a chill of foreboding. He had been freezing on that cursed watchtower all night, cold gnawing into his bones. Since Kago had returned, maimed and raving, his temper was like a dog with its teeth ripped out and tail trampled, violent, unhinged. He had ordered the lookouts to watch without rest. Torturer's Deep could strike at any moment. Damn it, that Torturer's Deep bastard gives me the creeps. He spat phlegm over the railing, muttering bitterly. Stories of Quen, the new master of Torturer's Deep, spread like plague through the harbor. Survivors of the tidal reef's battle told them in lurid detail, flaming swords, a great bow that fired burning arrows, and silent soldiers clad in steel, moving like towers of iron. The thought alone chilled the blood. Then his drowsy eyes flew wide. On the horizon, sails swelled, growing larger by the heartbeat. Enemy attack. His scream tore the silence apart, his hoarse voice sharp as broken glass. He hammered the rusted bronze bell beside him, sending its clangor through the harbor. Clang, clang, clang. The shrill alarm shattered Jawbreak Island's night. The docks exploded into chaos. Pirates stumbled half-dressed from their shacks, still reeking of drink, shouting curses as they scrambled for weapons. Kago's lieutenant came running, still tugging up his trousers, and snatched the spyglass from the lookout's hands. Through the lens, a fleet surged straight toward the harbor. On the lead ship's sail, clear in the torchlight, was the familiar figure of Roro-Uhoris. That wily old fox brandished a curved blade, pointing toward the docks, with ranks of armed pirates thronging behind him, blades gleaming as they roared. It's Roro, the main force of Torturer's Deep. They're attacking. The commander's voice carried the faintest tremor as he spun on his heel, roaring at his panicked men. Sound the highest alarm. Ready the ballistae. Move, damn you, move. Jawbreak Island's main harbor erupted like a hornet's nest struck with a stick. Pirates swarmed the defenses in chaos. Heavy ballistae were shoved onto the battlements, while archers scrambled clumsily up the low walls. Far out at sea, Roro stood on the stern deck of his medium galley, squinting at the mounting chaos in the harbor and the shrill clang of alarm bells. A sly, satisfied grin spread across his face. He leaned toward his first mate. Pass the order, every ship, make some noise. Beat those drums, blow those horns, wave every bloody flag you've got. Closer now, just a little closer, stay right on the edge of their range. Boom, 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 woo, woo, woo. The deep thrum of war drums and the piercing cry of horns carried across the sea as the banners of Torturer's Deep whipped and snapped on every ship. Roro's fleet pressed toward the main harbor with threatening force, yet cunningly held just within the edge of the enemy's heavy ballistic range. They shifted formation again and again, posturing as though ready to charge at any moment. At Roro's command, his loudest sailors stood at the bows, hurling insults at the shore. Kago, you unarmed cur. Come out and die. Scum of Jawbreak Island. We've come to collect your worthless hides. Lord Quen will drink from Kago's shark head. The curses, riding the beat of drums and horns, carried clearly to the walls. Pirates howled in fury, but fear kept them crouched behind their fortifications. A few ballista bolts shrieked through the air, splashing harmlessly into the sea well short of Roro's ships. Ha! That's it. Keep it, curse 'em out. Roro slapped his thigh in delight. Unlike the uproar of the main harbor, the bay sheltering the shipyard lay quiet beneath its shroud of mist. Hidden from the main channel, this was Kago's last hope. The alarm from the harbor had clearly reached them, several war galleys cast off from the docks and rowed hard toward the commotion. The rest, battered and crippled, lay beached in the crude yard where yawning craftsmen worked by lamplight, hammering sluggishly. On the outskirts, two weathered patrol boats kept watch. In the cramped cabin of one, the captain gnawed a piece of rock-hard salted meat, chasing it with sour wine. He'd lost badly at dice the night before, and his mood was foul. Captain, something's happening. The shout came trembling from the masthead lookout, thick with disbelief and fear. Damn it, quit your screaming. The captain cursed and dragged himself out, eyes bleary as he followed the sailor's pointing finger. His pupils shrank to pinpricks. It wasn't a trick of the mist. It was the dark wall of a fleet, their sails filling the horizon. Torturers Deep's fleet. But, they're supposed to be at the harbor. His voice cracked into a shriek, the meat falling from his hand unnoticed. He remembered the tales whispered about Torturers Deep's new master. The flaming sword. The fire-tipped arrow that had torn off Kago's arm. Turn it about. God's damn it, turn it around. Back to the shipyard, warn them. His voice broke as he bellowed. Signal the alarm. Enemy attack. Torturers Deep. We've been fooled. Their target isn't the harbor, it's the shipyard. The two patrol boats bolted like startled hares. Oarsmen, driven by blind terror, strained until their veins bulged, trying to wheel the ships around. Up the masts, sailors scrambled to raise the black danger pennant and light the beacon fire. But it was already too late. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 50 chapters ahead for now. patreon.com/BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 49, Marla the Salt Widow. The bay where the shipyard lay was broad and exposed, lacking the jagged defenses of Torturers Deep. The two small vessels from Jawbreak Island fled frantically under the looming shadow of Quen's fleet, only to be torn apart in an instant by a storm of crossbow bolts and precisely aimed stones. Quen had been lurking offshore for some time, watching as several oared ships departed the dockyard to reinforce the main harbor. Roro had clearly succeeded in drawing Kago's attention. It was time to strike. Land. Quen's command thundered across the flagship's deck. Pirate infantry roared as they boarded skiffs, surging ashore like a black tide. But what truly froze hearts with dread were the Dragon Soul Guards marching behind them, silent and unyielding as stone. Once ashore, they locked into a tight, disciplined square, their Valyrian steel weapons flashing with lethal light. Shipwrights still bent over repairs, sailors on watch, even a few low-ranking pirate captains, all of them blanched at the sight. Their courage broke instantly, sending them fleeing in panic without the slightest attempt at resistance. The Dragon Soul Guards advanced like machines of war, hunting down the fleeing pirates. Valyrian steel blades carved through leather armor and wooden shields as though they were paper. Spears drove through bodies one after another, harvesting lives with every thrust. Those who survived screamed in terror, scattering like rats, their formation shattered, their will to fight gone. Quen himself did not hurry ashore. He stood tall upon the stern of the nest of the crab, overlooking the battlefield. His eyes swept across the dockyard, searching for stragglers. When a larger Jawbreak Island warship attempted to break free of the docks to rally a counterattack, Quen dispatched his oared ships to cut it off. The boats surged forward at his command, hemming the vessel in. Bolts and stones rained down on it, the hull split open, the deck caved in, and even the mast snapped in half. The falling timber crushed men beneath it before they could even react, spraying the planks with blood. With the harbor cleared and the beach secured, victory seemed all but assured. But just as Quen's main force pressed inland, chasing down the broken remnants, disaster struck. From the mouth of the bay, where the waters had lain calm, a forest of sails burst into view without warning, far more than the remnants of Cago's fleet could account for. Pale banners whipped in the wind, marked with the image of a twisted sea serpent coiled around a skull. Weeping Reef Island. The Salt Widow, Marla. At their head surged the Widow Queen, a flagship even larger than the nest of the crab, its prow carved into the shape of a monstrous sea serpent ram. Behind her followed a vast fleet, no fewer than 30 or 40 ships of varying size. They struck at the precise moment when Quen's forces were most scattered and their formation weakened by the assault on the docks. They had been lying in wait. Now their lines unfurled with swift, deadly precision. It's a trap. Jorah Mormont's grim voice carried from the shallows. He knew we'd come for the shipyard. Withdrawing the ships was bait. Cago has joined forces with the Weeping Reef. Marla's fleet tactics left no doubt. They made no move to ram the shore or grapple for boarding. Instead, exploiting their sheer numbers and superior maneuverability, they spread wide and closed in, forming a massive tightening noose. Then came the storm, crossbow bolts and catapult stones, falling like a hail of death upon Quen's ships still trapped at sea. The sturdy oak planks of the nest of the crab splintered under a barrage of stones, shards flying in all directions. The reefbreaker's hull was pierced clean through by a massive ballista bolt, seawater rushing into the breach. Sailors struck by splinters screamed as they toppled into the sea. On the beachhead, the landing force that had just secured the advantage was suddenly plunged into peril. Cut off by the sudden appearance of a vast fleet, they stood exposed on the open shore, turned into living targets. Arrows from the Weeping Reef pirates whistled down in deadly volleys, felling men one after another. From the stern deck, Quen watched his warships buckle under the siege, saw the beachhead troops forced into a desperate fight with their backs to the water. His mind grew sharper, colder. He saw the truth of it instantly. The fleet at sea was split and encircled, the troops onshore pinned down. The deadlock had to be broken. And the only way to break it was to strike at the enemy's command, Marla. Pass my order. All ships rally to me. Form a defensive ring around the nest of the crab. Dragon Soul guards, hold the beachhead, do not yield an inch. All soldiers aboard, retaliate with the ballistae. Quen's voice cut through the chaos and the screams, carrying clear to every ear. The warships of Torturers deep heaved toward the flagship, drawing together for cover, their hulls shielding one another as arrows and stones poured down from the enemy. Onshore, the Dragon Soul guards once again proved their worth as instruments of war. Ignoring the storm of arrows, they lifted their heavy shields in silence, shielding the pirate infantry behind them. Locked into a tight phalanx, their Valyrian steel weapons rose and fell, each strike unleashing a spray of blood, hacking down Weeping Reef pirates who tried to storm ashore in skiffs, cutting them down in the shallows. Jorah Mormont fought like a maddened bear, sword cleaving through foes as he led from the front. Side by side with pirate soldiers and Dragon Soul guards, he held together a line that bent but did not break. But Marla's numbers were overwhelming, her followers famed for their brutality. Shrieking like banshees, they charged in wave after wave, heedless of losses. Several skiffs broke through the barrage, and Weeping Reef pirates leapt ashore, howling as they clashed with the soldiers of Torturers deep in vicious melee. The battle devolved into a brutal deadlock, every heartbeat spilling blood. Quen's gaze cut through the smoke, the screams, and the carnage, fixing on the towering stern of the Widow Queen. There, a figure stood unmistakable. A powerful woman, tall and broad-hipped, her bronze skin bared beneath rough leather armor. On her head sat a helmet made of skull, in her hand a great curved scimitar that gleamed as she barked commands, orchestrating the slaughter. The Salt Widow, Marla. She stood on her flagship with supreme confidence, her face lit with cruel delight as she watched the beachhead drenched in blood. Now, a cold fire blazed in Quen's eyes. He wasted no breath, no thought. Reaching behind him, he drew the dragonbone bow. The ashen frame shimmered with copper runes that seemed to drink in the light, radiating a power that made the air itself shudder. He pulled forth a single arrow, black as ink, its tip glimmering with eerie starlight. His will surged. Magic poured into the bow. VMMM. A strange hum rippled outward from the dragonbone bow. Swirling sigils and runes came alive, flaring blood-red as fire coiled silently around the black arrow. Quen's arms strained, muscles taut as he drew the bow to a perfect full moon. The bow creaked under the strain, ready to snap. Thrum. A detonation beyond the reach of human hearing split the battlefield, hurling its scream across hundreds of yards of sea in an instant. In that moment, time itself seemed to stop. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 50. An arrow through the heart. Everyone who saw it froze for an instant. On the stern of the widow queen, Marla, her scimitar raised high, suddenly went rigid. The cruel, savage grin on her face froze where it was. She lowered her head in disbelief, staring at the center of her broad, powerful chest. There, at the height of her heart, a gaping hole the size of a bowl had appeared, its edges glowing faintly with embers, the air thick with the stench of roasted flesh. Her expression locked into one of sheer shock and incomprehension. The last spark in her eyes guttered out like a candle in the wind. The scimitar slipped from her grasp and struck the deck with a sharp, despairing clang. A heartbeat later, her body, stripped of its core strength, collapsed like a boneless husk. She fell silently onto the icy deck as flames kindled across her form, spreading swiftly until they consumed her whole. The battlefield fell silent, as if muted. Lady Marla, stammered a nearby Weeping Reef captain, his voice shaking uncontrollably. The Salt Widow, she's dead. Another pirate gaped at the burning hole in Marla's chest, terror flooding his face. It's him. The new master of torturers deep. He killed Marla with fire sorcery. Panic erupted like a plague, sweeping from ship to ship across the Weeping Reef fleet. Their commander, slain in such a horrifying, unstoppable fashion, shattered the very core of their will. The ferocity and cruelty that had bound them together crumbled in the face of absolute power and nameless terror. What had been a surging tide of attack collapsed in an instant. The Weeping Reef pirates fell into chaos and dread. Some ships spun and fled outright. Others collided. Some even turned on each other, fighting for a path of escape. The once mighty fleet dissolved into a boiling frenzy of panic. Counterattack. Crush them. Quen seized the moment, his roar like thunder. The words lit a fire in the hearts of Torturers' Deep's soldiers, unleashing all the fury they had pent up. The warships bellowed with deafening roars as oarsmen summoned their last strength. The vessels surged forward like beasts breaking free of chains, slamming into the enemy's disordered ranks. Arrows and stones rained down like a storm of vengeance. On the beach, the troops roared like unleashed tigers, their battle cries shaking the air as they hunted down the fleeing Weeping Reef pirates, driving them into the sea or cutting them down on the blood-soaked sands. In an instant, the battle turned. The Weeping Reef fleet collapsed completely, shattering into scattered fragments racing to flee this cursed sea. When the last ship flying the Weeping Reef banner disappeared in panic over the far horizon, the shipyard beach and surrounding waters had become a vision of hell. The sea was stained dark red with blood, strewn with severed limbs and splintered timbers. The air reeked of blood, charred flesh, and death. Quen allowed no pause for rest, not even a glance at the slaughter he had wrought. He gathered his battered but unbroken men, ordering the captured shipwrights and pirates of Jawbreak Island and Weeping Reef locked away in the holds. Then he tasked Jorah with tallying the ships taken in battle. The heart of the shipyard was theirs. Several oared vessels, battered to different degrees, lay in the docks or stranded on the shore. Heaps of oak and ironwood planks, barrels of tung oil and fish glue, coils of rope, and piles of bronze nails and iron fittings were stacked in untouched corners and warehouses, precious stores for rebuilding and strengthening the fleet. Just then, a light galley cut through the mist from the main harbor. On board was an officer of Rorros, his face a blend of panic and exhilaration. Before the boat had even steadied, he was scrambling up onto the nest of the crab. Lord, there's chaos at the main harbor. The officer blurted, breathless. Quen's brow furrowed. He had ordered Roro only to harass at the harbor's edge, feint an assault, and withdraw if Cago's men sallied out. If the plan was followed, nothing should have gone wrong. Explain. What about Roro? Not Lord Roro, my lord. The officer hurried to clarify, swallowing nervously. It's the Jawbreak pirates, they've completely fallen apart. At first, when our fleet appeared, they rang the alarm so loud it shook the sky. The walls were crammed with men, ballistae were rolled out, they looked ready to fight to the last. Lord Roro had us stick to the plan, shout, wave banners, beat the drums, act like we were about to launch a full assault from just beyond their range. He paused, disbelief etched across his face. But then, half an hour later, the fortress suddenly caught fire. The flames spread fast, black smoke pouring into the sky. Stranger still, the pirates on the walls, bows drawn, ready to defend, dropped their weapons the moment they saw the fire. They panicked, screaming, and rushed back into the fortress. The walls were abandoned entirely. Lord Roro thought it too suspicious to act rashly, so he sent me at once to ask your command. Should we move into the main harbor? It's wide open now, and eerily silent. Quen's eyes narrowed to sharp points. Internal strife. Or a trap? He shook his head. Not being there himself, he couldn't yet judge. Send word to Roro. Keep strict watch on the harbor, no landing without orders. We sail for the main harbor immediately. His tone was iron. Signal the fleet. Abandon clearing the wreckage in the shipyard. Weigh anchor and set course for Jawbreak Island's main harbor. Jawbreak Island was a long, narrow mass stretching north to south. Its main harbor sat at the island's southernmost tip, nestled within a naturally sheltered bay. To the north rose a short but steep limestone hill, from which a small stream wound its way into the bay. Atop that hill clung Kago's seat of power, Jawbreaker Fortress. It was less a fortress than a stone stronghold of decent size, a low wall of rough limestone blocks, barely 6 or 7 feet high, snaked along the slope to enclose a modest area. Inside stood the pirates' main quarters, warehouses, and Kago's tower. The fort had little depth, its strength lay in the steep incline it sat upon. Any attacker would have to charge uphill, fully exposed to defenders, bolts and hurled weapons. At the foot of the hill, to the south, stretched Jawbreak Island's main harbor, where Kago's last fleet had been anchored. When Quen's warships appeared outside, Roro's fleet closed in at once. Roro clambered swiftly aboard the nest of the crab, skipping pleasantries as he pointed urgently toward the harbor. Lord, look, not a soul left inside. After the fortress caught fire, all of Kago's men ran back in. Quen fixed his eyes on the sight before them. In the harbor, ships of all sizes rocked gently with the tide, mooring ropes slapping hollowly against their sides. No guards, no sailors, not even a skiff was manned. The docks lay deserted, littered with weapons, helmets, and gear abandoned in the scramble. But up by Jawbreaker Fortress, the view was starkly different. Thick columns of black smoke billowed from within its low walls, rising into the not yet bright sky. Even from afar, the stench of burning wood carried on the wind. Flags hung limp and crooked atop the battlements, with not a man in sight, only smoke pouring ceaselessly from behind the walls. Faint shouts and the clash of metal drifted from within, muffled by the hillside and distance, too unclear to make sense of. The entire main harbor seethed with a strange, unsettled chaos. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 50 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com/BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 51. Infighting. Only now did he dismiss the possibility of an empty fort ruse. That night at Torturer's Deep, Crabclaw had already seen through Quen's plan, yet still let him and his men enter before launching an ambush. First, Crabclaw was confident the ambush would be enough to kill Quen and his followers. Second, Quen had brought only 5 ships into Torturer's Deep, giving him no advantage in numbers. But the most critical point was that Crabclaw had no idea Quen possessed a dragonbone bow capable of loosing flaming arrows. Unlike Crabclaw, Kago had already tasted the bow's fury. He knew all too well what awaited anyone caught in Quen's sights in open ground. With command of the main harbor fleet and the fortress's strong defenses, there was no chance he would abandon such advantages by throwing open the gates. The only explanation was that something had erupted within the fortress, something far beyond his control. Quen judged the situation instantly. Kago is either dead or has lost control. This is a gift from the gods, we must not waste it. Assault the fortress at once. Speed was everything. He had to strike while Jawbreak Island was still in chaos, crushing Kago's last foundation of power with overwhelming force, leaving no chance to regroup. At Quen's command, the oars bit into the water as the fleet surged toward the main harbor docks at full speed. The pirate infantry, well drilled, quickly formed ranks under their officers' shouts. Siege rams were unloaded from the transports. Crude but serviceable scaling ladders were shouldered by the pirates. The Dragon Soul Guards once again led the charge. Silent and relentless, they stormed up the steep slope below the fortress, their massive bodies pounding through gravel and soil with the steady rhythm of machines. Several ladders were thrust into place against the lower, more level stretches of wall. Climb. At their officers' bellow, the pirates of Torturer's Deep roared wildly. Daggers clenched in their teeth, they began to scramble upward. When Quen's forces smashed through the crumbling gates, the Dragon Soul Guards and Torturer's Deep pirates poured in like a flood, sweeping into Crackjaw Fortress, now shrouded in smoke and fire. The scene inside was hell itself. Narrow alleys and the so-called square were strewn with corpses in common pirate garb. Blood ran together with mud, and the smoke-filled air was choked with the reek of iron and gore. Some scattered pockets still fought on, but most either cowered like frightened quail in corners, trembling, or wandered in shock with vacant eyes. The battle's heart was at the fortress's summit, outside Kago's tower. The closer they drew, the louder the clash of steel and the more savage the carnage. The ground before the tower was heaped with bodies, the blood covering the stones like a crimson carpet. Two pirate bands were locked in a desperate struggle. One group, smaller in number, barely 20 men, had formed a semicircle with their backs against the burning tower's base. Every one of them was drenched in blood, battered with wounds, yet their eyes blazed with the madness of cornered beasts. At their center stood shipbreaker Kago. His condition was pitiful. His bare chest was caked with blood and soot. The filthy bandages over his shoulder stump were soaked through with blood and pus, reeking of rot. His face was ashen, his eyes sunken, flickering with a mixture of terror and rage. In his right hand he gripped his signature heavy double-bladed axe, but his swings trembled with exhaustion and the agonizing drag of his severed arm. He roared like a beast, driving on his last diehards. Hold! Kill that traitor Hal, and I'll grant him an island. Their attackers numbered a little more, about 30 men, and struck with brutal ferocity. At their head was a lean, hardy middle-legged pirate. His right hand was gone, replaced with a gleaming iron hook that dripped blood. In his left hand he wielded a curved scimitar. His body bore many wounds, but his spirit blazed unbroken. This was the traitor Kago had named, Hal the Iron Hook. Kago, your doom is upon you. For our fallen brothers, kill. Hal's voice was hoarse, laced with searing hatred and the desperation of a final stand. He swung his iron hook to knock aside a slashing blade, then drove his scimitar deftly into the ribs of one of Kago's guards, a strike as ruthless as it was efficient. The men beside him unleashed the last of their strength, hurling themselves against Kago's faltering line. The battle had reached its breaking point. Hal's side pressed the advantage, but Kago and his remaining diehards fought back with the savagery of the doomed. Quen's arrival was like ice water poured into a boiling cauldron. The heavy tread of the Dragon Soul guards and the cries of the torturers' deep pirates drew every eye on the battlefield. For a heartbeat, the ferocious clash froze. Kago's lone right eye snapped toward the entrance. The instant he recognized that familiar figure, his pupil shrank to a pinprick. Terror consumed him utterly. It's that eastern brat from Torturer's Deep. Kago let out a shrill, despairing scream. Forgetting even Hal before him, he instinctively turned to flee into the burning tower. But in that fatal instant, as his mind faltered and his movements lagged, Hal's gaze flared with a predator's light. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Hal hurled his scimitar straight at Kago's face, forcing him to flail awkwardly with his axe to deflect it. In the same instant, as Kago's balance wavered, Hal struck. His iron hook, coiled and ready, shot forward like a viper from its lair. With the fury of vengeance and the resolve of one ready to die, he drove it into the side of Kago's neck. Gah! Kago's scream broke into ragged gasps, his lone eye bulging with pain and suffocation. The hook sank deep between neckbone and windpipe. Blood, scalding hot, burst from the wound in a torrent, gushing from his mouth and nose. Kago's dying strength hurled Hal forward, but Hal only grinned in savage triumph. Planting all his weight behind the iron hook, he wrenched it back with brutal force. Snap! Splat! The sickening crack of bone and tear of flesh rang out. Kago's massive head tore free, ripped from his neck by the iron hook. Blood sprayed down like rain, drenching Hal's face in crimson. The headless body swayed stiffly, blood spurting from the stump in a fountain, before toppling with a heavy splash into the spreading pool. After a few spasms, it lay still. The severed head dangled from the hook, eyes bulging, mouth frozen half open in a soundless scream of terror and rage. Before the tower, silence fell. Both Hal's men and Kago's last loyalists stood stunned, paralyzed by the sheer brutality of what they had witnessed. Even the roar of the flames seemed to fade. Hal sucked in ragged breaths, each one thick with the stench of blood. Struggling upright with his left hand, he kept his right arm raised high, the hook still clutching Kago's dripping head. Ignoring the corpse at his feet, his bloodshot eyes burned with grim resolve as they locked on Quen through the haze of smoke and firelight. Hal's voice cracked as he shouted, Kago butchered our brothers on this island, feeding some to the sharks. Under his rule, Jawbreak Island was doomed. I, Iron Hook, Hal, ended his reign with my own hands. His head is yours, Lord. He thrust the hooked head forward. In the firelight, the grotesque trophy swung, blood still dripping from the ragged stump of its neck. Hal dropped heavily to one knee in the clotted blood, bowing his head low. With both arms extended, he presented the severed head in a posture of submission. I swear allegiance to you and offer the remnants of Jawbreak Island. This head is proof of my loyalty. I beg your mercy, Lord, grant us the chance to prove our worth under your command. At his words, his surviving men snapped from their shock. Weapons clattered to the ground as they dropped to their knees one by one, foreheads pressed to the blood-soaked earth. We surrender. Forgive us, Lord. We pledge our service. Kago's last few followers stared at their leader's severed head, then at the encircling dragon soul guards and torturers, deep pirates closing in with silent menace. Whatever fight remained in them crumbled away. Exchanging weary glances, they let their weapons fall and knelt in defeat. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 52. Occupying Jawbreak Island. Thick smoke coiled above the square as flames leapt across the tower and nearby buildings with a crackling roar. Quen's gaze swept over the kneeling Hal and the familiar severed head in his hands. He looked again at Hal, kneeling in a pool of blood, his entire body drenched. A heavy silence pressed down like a boulder on every man forced to his knees. Only the crackle of fire and the mournful wail of the sea wind through the ruins broke the stillness. Quen pondered. Hal had not intended to surrender at first. Only when surrounded by his forces had he yielded, bowing to necessity. Still, at a time when he was in need of men, having someone familiar with the waters of the Stepstone's pledge service would prove useful for future conquests. Quen's voice carried authority. Very well, Hal. You've done well. I accept your allegiance, and that of your brothers on Jawbreak Island. He did not reach for the repulsive head, nor did he give it a second glance. Turning slightly, he ordered the man beside him. Esser Jorah, hang this head on the highest, most visible point of the fortress. Let all of Jawbreak Island see that the age of Kago the shipbreaker has ended. Yes, my lord. Jorah's reply was low, his face expressionless. He stepped forward, drew a spare length of coarse hemp rope from his belt, and swiftly looped it around Kago's hair and jaw, tying a firm knot. Then, carrying it as though it were no more than a bundle of goods, he turned without emotion and walked toward the tallest flagpole beside the tower. Kago's head swung in his grasp, blood dripping to the ground in a broken crimson trail. Quen's gaze returned to Hal. Hal, you and your men will be temporarily placed under Roro's fleet. Assist him in stabilizing Jawbreak Island's outposts, tallying supplies, and gathering surrendered men. Should you harbor other thoughts, I'll hang your head beside Kago's. He left the threat unfinished, but as his icy gaze swept across Hal and the crowd kneeling behind him, a chill pierced every spine, rising to the crown of their heads. It was as if the invisible scythe of death hovered at their throats. The dragon soul guard's cold stares pinned them like steel. Never, my lord. My iron hook is at your command. Hal pressed his forehead to the ground, his voice trembling with both fear and the elation of survival. He knew he had won his first gamble, but from this moment on, he was bound irrevocably to the chariot of his ruthless and powerful new master. There was no turning back. As Kago's bloodied head was raised high on the tallest flagpole of Jawbreak Fort, swaying in the sea wind and morning breeze, it declared to the entire island the end of the old age and the arrival of a new order. Jawbreak Island, once the dreaded lair of pirates feared by every merchant ship, was now under Quen's command. And his reputation spread with wings, carried on the bloody news deep into the Stepstones. After seizing Jawbreak Island, Quen immediately summoned Jelena from Torturers Deep. By then, Roro had completed the tally of pirates. Seated in what had once been Kago's tower hall, Quen looked down at Roro, Hal, and Jorah Mormont. Roro spoke with delight. My lord, the count is finished. A total of 2,500 pirates have surrendered on Jawbreak Island. In addition, the island's storehouses hold immense wealth, worth over 200,000 golden dragons when measured in the coin of the Seven Kingdoms. 200,000. Adding this to his funds from Torturers Deep, and subtracting Roro's spending in Spearhandle Village, he now held nearly 700,000 golden dragons. Enough to build a fine fleet, and he already commanded the ships of both Torturers Deep and Jawbreak Island. Oh, about Weeping Reef, have we sent men there yet? Quen remembered how, after he shot Marla dead last night, the remaining Weeping Reef warships had scattered like frightened birds. This time it was not Roro who answered, but Hal. Lord, no one knows the waters of Weeping Reef better than us on Jawbreak Island. I've already ordered our brothers to assist Lord Roro's fleet in taking it. If those bastards resist, we'll crush them. Our feud with Weeping Reef runs deep, with hundreds of disputes over the years. Kago was abandoned by all because he tried to collude with that salt whore of Weeping Reef. She pretends to support Jawbreak Island, but in truth, she would plunder us at every turn. We jawbreak men will never ally with a salt whore. The venom in Hal's words was bone deep, and the pirate chieftains standing behind him all voiced their agreement. Quen was surprised. He hadn't realized the enmity between Jawbreak Island and Weeping Reef was so bitter, more like sworn enemies, reminiscent of the Brackens and Blackwoods of the Riverlands. That being the case, perhaps Marla's raid last night hadn't been aimed solely at him. Jawbreak Island's shipyard could have been a target as well. Otherwise, why hadn't they moved to stop him before his landing, instead of waiting until he had rampaged ashore to make a belated show of force? A clever scheme, but it had ended with Quen's arrow. Roro, what's the situation with Jawbreak Island's fleet? Quen turned to him. After securing the island, he had ordered Roro to register every ship. Roro, unable to contain his excitement, reported, there are 26 ore-driven ships left, including 5 double-decked warships still fit for use. A smile touched Quen's lips. He was now one of the great powers of the Narrow Sea. With the 3 ships from Torturer's Deep, the number of double-decked warships rose to 8. Ordinary single-deck warships numbered 35. On top of that, he had bought 30 merchant sailing ships in Volantis. Though their design made them ill-suited for oar power, his 5 swan ships were each armed with heavy crossbows. In all, Quen now commanded 48 vessels ready for war. He addressed the men. With Marla dead, Weeping Reef is leaderless. Taking the island after our victory should be no trouble. But our true enemy is not Kago or Marla. It is the man who calls himself the Prince of the Narrow Sea, Saladhor San. Only by defeating him can we truly rule these waters. Roro, you and Esser Jorah will go to Spearhandle village to buy repair materials and as many heavy ship weapons as possible. If there are shipwrights seeking employment, you may hire them outright. At these words, a trace of unease flickered across Roro's face, but he quickly masked it. Yes, Lord. When the others had dispersed, Roro returned alone to the hall. Lowering his voice, he asked, Lord, why send me with Esser Jorah to Spearhandle village? Are you not concerned? Roro was shrewd and keenly observant. He had long since noticed that Jorah was not truly loyal to Quen. More than once, he had urged Quen not to trust a man with a divided heart, but every time, Quen had only smiled and shaken his head. This time, Roro could not help but raise the warning again. Quen no longer concealed his reasoning. Roro, you've been with me long enough to know my ways. If there were no advantage, would I have kept him at my side for so long? Sending you with Jorah to Spearhandle village has a purpose. He leaned close and whispered a few words into Roro's ear. Roro's expression shifted at once, worry giving way to a smile. Lord, I understand. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 50 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com/BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 53. Saladhor San. Evening. The Jawbreak Island fleet was returning from Weeping Reef Island. Hal brought word that Marla's pirates had fled by ship. Before leaving, those bastards had carried off most of Weeping Reef's wealth, leaving the Jawbreak Island fleet that went to claim it empty-handed. Quen felt his heart sink. The pirates had either escaped to the edges of the Stepstones, or, they were heading to Bloodstone Island to seek aid from Saladhor San. He was certain they would join forces with Saladhor and march against him. The real storm was brewing. Time was shorter than he had expected. To face the enemy, he would have to plan ahead. Quen left Kago Fortress on Jawbreak Island, his steps heavy as he passed pirates clearing away the battlefield's wreckage. These former Jawbreak Island marauders now played the clumsy role of cleaners, cowed into submission by his cold rule and the silent threat of the Dragon Soul Guards. Charred beams, shattered weapons, and hardened clots of blackened blood were shoveled away. At the harbor pier, Quen stood with his boots on planks stained dark with blood and bleached pale by seawater, staring out at the deepening twilight on the horizon. He had already settled on a reorganization plan earlier that day. The 2,500 pirate soldiers of Jawbreak Island would be merged with the 1,500 survivors from Torturer's Deep. Roro was given command of 1,000, while Hal would lead 500. Of the rest, Jelena would command 2,000 and Janice 500. He had once kept Jelena at Torturer's Deep, fearing a sudden strike from Kago. Now that both Kago and Marla were dead, Jelena could be freed to take on primary combat duties. By the time she reached Jawbreak Island, night had already fallen. She arrived worn and travel-stained. Even aboard ship, Jelena had already heard the news that the island had changed hands. Her cold, Composed features showed no ripple as she said, "Congratulations, my lord. The situation in the Stepstones is now clear. Once Salidhor San is removed, you will have full control over the narrow sea." Quen nodded. True. But Salidhor is no fool. He has sailed the narrow sea for many years, and the strength he's gathered should not be underestimated. Jalena's gaze lingered on his face. "My lord, why not simply strike at the head?" She paused, then went on. "Instead of meeting Salidhor in open battle, we could strike at his stronghold and kill him. These past months have shown me that the pirates of the Stepstones are nothing but a rabble. Unlike the great houses and kingdoms, who are bound by oaths and honor, pirates collapse the moment their leader is gone." Jalena was quick to learn. Since leaving the ruins of Valyria, she had absorbed much from Quen about the cultures and histories of Westeros and the free cities. "That's a sound idea," Quen said, "but I can't exactly storm the enemy camp alone, can I?" Her violet eyes locked onto his. "My lord, you could become a true dragon." Quen shook his head slightly, his gaze turning distant. "Jalena, your sword is sharp, but your vision must reach farther. The Stepstones hold decisive weight for both sides of the narrow sea. They control the trade routes, linking two continents. Once we unify them, countless eyes will be fixed on this place. The Iron Throne, the 9 free cities, and others besides. If I must spend vast amounts of magic just to deal with these pirates, how will I have enough left to face those greater powers?" He walked to the end of the pier, staring into the black vastness of the sea, and continued, "If I show my trump card now, both shores of the narrow sea will unite to destroy us, scheming to bring me down with scorpion bolts." Aegon Targaryen conquered the 7 kingdoms, except Dorne, with only 3 dragons and a few thousand men. But in those days, the 7 kingdoms were separate realms, each at war with the other, their interests divided. That disunity made conquest possible. Now, the 7 kingdoms have been one realm under the Iron Throne for 300 years. They have lived together, intermarried, and fought side by side in wars against foreign foes. At this moment, as a foreigner, if I were to conquer Westeros, I would face a unified regime, the Iron Throne, not the fractured 7 kingdoms Aegon faced. Quen's voice was deep and powerful. "Jalena, tell me, how much magic would I need to face this? 100,000 or 1,000,000? How many dragons? 3, or more? No. Time is on our side. Our young dragons will soon hatch. They will grow stronger day by day. Magic will one day return to the world and free us from our limits. What we can do now is use our limited magic to create extra gains before the hatchlings mature and before magic returns." Clearly, Salidhor is not part of that plan. He turned, his eyes flashing with a cold, resolute light. "Jalena, trust me. I've been waiting for one opportunity, one that matters, and it will come when we take the Stepstones." Jalena was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Lord, I have always trusted your judgment." Quen nodded and fell silent. His deep gaze returned to the boundless darkness, as though already piercing the thick sea fog to see the clamor and plots unfolding on Bloodstone. Bloodstone, at the stronghold of Salidhor San. The air here was the exact opposite of the grim stillness after the battle at Jawbreak Fort. Lamps burned bright. The hall buzzed with life, heavy with the sense of roasting fat, spices, sweat, and ale. A great feast was underway. More than a dozen long oak tables were crammed with people, the surfaces were piled with heavy wooden platters. Chunks of beef stewed with beets, turnips, and parsnips simmered in rich gravy. Roast chicken stuffed with fruit browned to a crisp. Onions caramelized and glazed with meat juices sent up an intoxicating sweetness. Most striking were the suckling pigs at the center, their skins crackling with oil, shining a deep golden red. Pirates hacked at hard black bread with crude knives, greedily mopping up fat and juices, devouring it all. Chewing, swallowing, and the clink of cups and plates filled the air. At the highest point, behind the lordly high table, Prince of the Narrow Sea, Sothoryos San sat like a true king. He wore an outer robe woven with silver thread that shone so bright it dazzled, the sleeves so long they nearly trailed on the floor. Emerald, monkey-shaped buttons carved from jade flashed extravagant green in the lamplight. His carefully curled silver-white hair was topped by an ornate, fan-shaped green velvet cap, stuck through with a few peacock tail feathers that trembled as he spoke. With triumphant satisfaction he raised a glass of Dorne wine, dark as blood, his voice booming over the hall's noise. "Brothers. Tonight, Bloodstone welcomes honored guests." He pointed toward a group of figures at the hall's entrance who looked utterly out of place. Some 20 or 30 of them, ragged, bearing fresh wounds, stood with faces hollowed by fear, exhaustion, and burning hatred. They were Marla's last remnants, having fled here in disgrace. They come from Weeping Reefs, loyal followers of the valiant, Salt Widow, Marla. Salador's voice seethed with incitement and grief. They bring atrocity. An eastern sorcerer has crept into the stepstones. With foul witchcraft he took torturers deep, slaughtered the Kago of Jawbreak Island, and, by devilish means, murdered our fearless ally, Marla, before all eyes. The hall fell silent at once, only the sizzle of fat falling into the brazier broke the hush. Every pirate's eyes fixed on the survivors from Weeping Reefs. The raw terror and hatred on their faces were proof enough. Salador slammed his cup down, crimson wine splashing out. This evil sorcerer's ambition will not stop. Weeping Reefs was only the beginning. Even Jawbreak Island could not sat him. Now his eyes are on our bloodstone, on the whole stepstones. He wants to turn us all into souls lost to his dark sorcery. He drew in a long breath, his voice exploding like a wave. I, Salador San, the Prince of the Narrow Sea, you chose, will not allow this. The stepstones are our home, the Narrow Sea our hunting ground. We will not let an eastern sorcerer and his black arts run wild here. I declare. He raised his cup high again, a cunning, dangerous light in his eyes. We will form a united force. With steel and fire we will wipe this evil sorcerer and his army from the stepstones. We will bring back his head and hang it atop Bloodstone, so all who live along the Narrow Sea can see the fate that awaits those who dare challenge us. Chapter 54. Movements in Tyrosh. At the heart of Tyrosh stands a magnificent palace of dazzling colors. The entire structure rises like a colossal reef fortress from the deep sea, built from countless massive slabs of sturdy gray-white marble. Each stone, meticulously polished, gleams with a bright, radiant luster. The people of Tyrosh are obsessed with color. At the palace's corners, lintels, and bases, master craftsmen have set mother of pearl, deep lapis lazuli, and shimmering stained glass, like treasures left behind by frozen waves. It is not only the Archon's bedchamber and seat of power, but also the crystallization of Tyrosh's oceanic soul. Within the vast main hall, the ruler of Tyrosh was now consumed by the storm of the stepstones. The Archon, past 50, was short and stout, his bloated body nearly swallowing the great chair beneath him, a throne in all but name. Its frame was dark hardwood, sheathed in priceless silk and velvet, soft as a cloud. But he did not enjoy its luxury alone. Several young, alluring mistresses lounged against him like languid cats, pearl-bright nails grazing his lavish robes, their warm breath laced with cloying sweetness brushing his ears. Yet the Archon's thoughts were far from these pleasures. His astonishingly thick hair and beard, dyed a striking azure blue, quivered beneath his furrowed brow. His eyes, hard as sapphires iced over, swept across the officials bickering below. Beneath soaring domes and columns inlaid with mother of pearl and colored glass, the advisors in their brocade robes quarreled fiercely, flushed and red-faced, over whether Tyrosh should now intervene in the turmoil of the stepstones. The clamor echoed across the polished serpentine floor, its surface carved with krakens and ships and softened with thick myrish carpets. Enough. The Archon's roar cracked like thunder, silencing the chamber at once. He seized a heavy silver goblet at his side and hurled it down. It struck the rich myrish carpet with a dull thud, bouncing and rolling until it lay still, its carved seahorse glinting in the wavering candlelight. A maid in a sheer silk gown glided forward, gracefully lifting the cup and swiftly replacing it upon the ebony table inlaid with ivory and mother of pearl with a fresh, equally lavish goblet for her enraged lord. The hall fell deathly still, broken only by the slow curl of costly incense smoke rising from the censer. Gazing at his silenced advisors, the Archon's fury threatened to spill over. At that moment, the palace's great bronze doors, gilded and carved with the sigil of the three-headed god, swung open. A figure strode inside. He was stocky, but most striking was his wild, seaweed-like mane of green hair and beard. My dear brother, where have you been? The Archon's scowl gave way at once to joy. His bulky frame even leaned forward. The gods bless your timely arrival. Quickly, give me counsel. That eastern upstart who appeared from nowhere in the stepstones has nearly devoured all the pirate dens, and now his blades are pointed at Tyrosh's very gates. How should we respond? His voice brimmed with reliance. Though the Archon ruled Tyrosh, since his rise to power he had drowned himself in wine and women, leaving governance to a sprawling bureaucracy of officials. But his green-bearded brother remained his most trusted advisor, always by his side with counsel. A maid swiftly brought over a chair draped in bright green velvet, no less sumptuous than the Archon's own. Greenbeard sat with unruffled composure, taking a silver goblet from another maid. It brimmed with crystal-clear pear brandy, its crisp, fruity fragrance rising into the air. He drank leisurely, savoring the mellow taste on his tongue before speaking. I've just escaped another tedious farce. That beggar king held yet another of his ridiculous, court banquets. By the gods, the place was worse than the cheapest brothel in our port. A few merchants, who knows where they crawled from, hawked their wares, and they dare call it a restoration council. The so-called banquet offered sour wine, bread hard as stone, and the dancing ladies of the court reeked of dockside perfume. His contempt rang out unmasked, echoing through the vast hall. On any other day, the Archon of Tyrosh might have joined his green-bearded brother in mocking that beggar king. But now, all his thoughts were burdened with the stepstones. Greenbeard noticed the Archon's troubled expression and shifted the subject, his voice low and steady. My lord need not worry. Though that Easterner has seized many islands, he's made no move against Spearhandle village, which remains under Tyrosh's control. I was just there a few days ago. His men placed several large orders, and thanks to him, our coffers are overflowing. The Archon rubbed his plump fingers in unease, making Bluebeard's beard twitch. I fear this Easterner may one day set his sights on Tyrosh. Set his sights. Greenbeard let out a short laugh, a sly smile curling his lips. By the three-headed god, he'll never have the time or the nerve. Don't forget, his biggest problem right now is Salidhor San. That old fox has rallied the remaining pirates of the Narrow Sea to face him head-on. Nearly 100 ships armed with heavy crossbows alone, enough to give the Easterner hell. The Archon sucked in a sharp breath, then frowned in realization. By the gods, how could Salidhor muster such strength? You mean the Lysan have stepped in personally? Exactly. Greenbeard chuckled darkly, his eyes glittering with calculation. That foreigner knows nothing of the stepstones. We Tyroshi rule the northern chain, while Lee props up that old octopus Salidhor to hold the western reefs. This golden waterway is the lifeblood of the free cities. If he wages war on Salidhor, he makes an enemy of Lee itself. It's suicide. The Archon still looked uneasy. But, what if Salidhor loses? Greenbeard's smile hardened, cold and cruel. Then we'll let those arrogant Easterners taste the might of the Tyroshi fleet. If war truly comes, aside from our unmatched paddlesail warships, we can throw gold at it, hire every sellsail fleet plying the Narrow Sea. Gold, after all, is something we have in abundance. He added the words with weight. At last, the Archon's taut nerves eased. His heavy body sank into the soft cushions, his mistress curling into his embrace. Very well, very well. Let the Easterners and the Lysan fight to the death. We'll reap the spoils. Greenbeard's gaze lingered on the Archon and his mistress, a flicker of contempt crossing his eyes. Best if they both bleed themselves dry, leaving corpses piled high. Then. His voice dropped to a whisper, like the hiss of a sea serpent. The entire sea will bow beneath the banner of Tyrosh. His eyes passed over the Archon's vacant gaze, already fixed on his mistress's full bosom, leaving only cold disdain in his heart. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 50 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com/BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 55. The Iron Throne's attention. Meanwhile, deep within the Red Keep of King's Landing, a different kind of heavy, stifling atmosphere filled the small council chamber. This hall, the symbol of supreme authority in the Seven Kingdoms, was nothing like the gaudy splendor of Tyrosh. Its grandeur was stern and weighty, steeped in the dust of history and the chill of power. Beneath their feet spread vast Myrish carpets, rich in color and intricate in pattern. Soft and silent underfoot, they swallowed every stray sound. In one corner stood a towering wooden screen from the Summer Isles, carved with exotic birds and beasts so lifelike their feathers and scales seemed to shimmer with warmth in the candlelight. The walls were draped with priceless tapestries from Norvos, Qohor, and Lee, depicting the War of Conquest, the legends of the gods, or elaborate geometric patterns, silent witnesses in the dim hall. Most striking of all were the twin Valyrian stone sphinxes flanking the heavy oak doors. Carved from marble black as night, their forms were fluid yet powerful. Only their eyes broke the smooth lines, 2 great garnets, blood-red and gleaming coldly in the flickering candlelight. At the head of the long table, the seat that symbolized the Iron Throne's true master sat empty. In place of the king, a drunken wastrel lost to brothels and the hunt, sat the aged hand of the king, Jon Arryn, great lord of the Eyrie. Years had carved deep lines into his face, and fatigue all but seeped from his slightly stooped back. Forcing himself awake, he worked through the mountain of scrolls piled on the table, each one a reminder of the kingdom's crushing debts. Around the long table sat the 5 core members of the small council. Jon Arryn lifted his bloodshot eyes to the man seated across from him. A short, plain-featured man, but with a sharp, lively gaze. His gray-green eyes always seemed to carry the shadow of a smile. A small, neatly trimmed beard framed his chin, and streaks of silver ran through his dark hair, oddly deepening the mature charm of his handsome face. Petter, Jon Arryn's voice was heavy with weariness, his brow furrowed. Has the envoy from the Iron Bank been sent away? Littlefinger, Petter Baelish, reacted at once. He nodded, wearing his usual inscrutable smile. Yes, my lord. Their ship left Blackwater Bay at first light. Gods above. Before the words had left his mouth, a clear, lightly mocking voice cut in. It came from a strikingly handsome young man seated to Arryn's left. His long black hair brushed his shoulders. He wore a dark green velvet doublet, perfectly tailored and embroidered with 12 golden Baratheon stags. It was Renly Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End and Master of Laws. Lounging lazily in his chair, he drawled, "Here we are, great lords of the realm, members of the small council, yet we must bow and smile to those bravos stinking of coin. At times I truly think we've become beggars on the street corners of King's Landing, fretting all day about tomorrow's bread and the king's banquet expenses." His tone was half in jest, half sharp with scorn. Beside him sat a man with a face dark and stern as cast iron. At Renly's words, his features hardened further, a frost settling over them. Renly, perhaps you should keep such jests for the times when His Grace himself attends the council. This was Renly's elder brother, Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone and Master of Ships. Renly did not bristle. Instead, he flashed a wider smile, his white teeth gleaming. My good brother, you and His Grace are both my brothers, and near enough in age. I thought you must have exchanged countless opinions on such troubles in private by now. Stannis's pale lips twitched, as if ready to snap back. But Jon Arryn's weary, pleading gaze fell on him, joined by the eyes of the others at the table. Stannis swallowed the words rising in his throat, giving only a sharp snort through his nose. His gaze cut like a blade across Renly's fine velvet doublet. Jon Arryn watched the king's 2 brothers, so different in temper, fall into another silent clash. He sighed inwardly. Clearing his throat, he drew their focus back to the council's true matter. My lords. His voice rang heavy in the vast, ornate chamber. His Grace may have no time for the crown's finances, but as members of the small council, we must face reality. As of today. He paused, sweeping the table with his tired eyes. The crown's total debt has reached 5 million golden dragons. The number landed like a stone in still water, plunging the hall into suffocating silence. Everyone knew who had hosted one lavish tournament after another. Who had squandered gold on feasts and revels, bleeding the treasury dry and burying the realm in staggering debt. Jon Arryn felt the unspoken blame and helplessness saturating the silence. A deep, consuming weariness threatened to overwhelm him. He forced himself to stay composed, searching for some glimmer of hope. My lords, in the days ahead, certain unnecessary and overly lavish expenses must be cut back drastically. As for His Grace. His voice grew strained. I will find a way to counsel him. My lord Hand, a voice sweet as honey cut in. The speaker was a bald man seated beside Jon Arryn. His face was pale and rounded, his body plump, his silk robes bright and gaudy. Every gesture carried the scent of powder and perfume. Varys, the master of whisperers, laid a soft, damp hand lightly on Arryn's arm. I fear our king is not accustomed to contradiction. When someone dares advise him, don't do this, you shouldn't do that, or, this must never be allowed, oh dear, the effect is usually no different than urging him to do it all the faster. You've seen it yourself, every grand tourney is like a spoon cast of pure gold, scraping yet another piece from our already empty treasury. A flicker of discomfort passed over Jon Arryn's face. Without comment, he drew his arm back from Varys's overly familiar touch. Varys, he said, changing the subject, what intelligence have you to report? Unruffled, as though prepared for this very moment, Varys smiled sweetly and slipped a rolled parchment from the perfumed sleeve of his robe. Well, some curious tidings out of the sisters, he said slowly, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed hall. Fishermen claim to have sighted krakens off the Bight. PFF'd. Renly Baratheon burst out laughing, shattering the heavy air. Lord Varys, he said, his handsome face full of mockery, surely you don't mean the Greyjoys have hacked their way through the next swamps and sailed their longships straight into the narrow sea under our noses. Varys's dark, knowing eyes turned to Renly, though his saccharine smile did not waver. The Lord misjudges me. I speak not of ironborn waving axes, but of the true creature itself. They say its waves swallowed a whaler from Essos' hole. Renly only shrugged. A kraken. Gods above, Varys, I'd sooner believe a Targaryen dragon has risen from the grave. At least beneath this very castle lie no small number of their fossilized bones. Still smiling, Varys glanced down at the parchment again, his tone unchanging, disquieting. There is more. From the stepstones comes news perhaps more worthy of your lordship's concern. A sorcerer from the distant east has, in but 3 or 4 months, swept aside entrenched pirate bands, taken several islands, and now stands on the brink of war with Salladhor Saan himself. Jon Arryn's brow furrowed tighter. The shadow of death had not yet lifted, and now new threats seemed to loom just beyond their shores. An eastern sorcerer? He asked, his voice low. From where? Varys rolled the syllables on his tongue, sickly sweet. Yiti. Yiti. The very name seemed to freeze the chamber. Faces shifted at once. Even Stannis, who had sat in cold silence till now, raised his head. Yiti, a land farther than Qarth, more ancient, more mysterious, a realm of legend said to be paved in gold. Grand Maester Pycelle, who had seemed half asleep until then, stirred and spoke in his slow, wheezing voice. As far as I know, Yiti lies thousands of leagues away. What business could an Easterner have, coming all this way across the narrow sea, to meddle in our quarrels? Varys did not answer him directly. Instead, he lowered his eyes again to the parchment, as if checking the details once more. My lords, I carry tidings still more troubling. It is said this sorcerer commands an army 1,000 strong. Each soldier armed in full plate that appears to be forged of Valyrian steel, wielding blades of the same, and fighting with savage ferocity. But most chilling of all. His voice dropped to a whisper. My informants swear again and again, these soldiers are not living men. They are corpses, raised from their graves and bound by some dark and ancient Eastern sorcery. By the 7, Varys. Renly's laugh rang out once more. Your sweet little birds must have flown astray this time, crashed headlong into the doom of Valyria, and come back choked on volcanic ash to fill your ears with such nonsense. From across the table, Petyr Baelish smirked, his tone sly as he interjected, or perhaps they strayed beyond the wall and lost their wits to the old forest's bogeyman. Varys lifted his perfumed hands in a gesture of mild injury. Ah, my lords, how cruel you are to wrong me so. When have I ever misled the small council with false tidings? His expression sobered. These reports come from a knight in exile, a man in dire straits. He claims the sorcerer has taken his beloved wife hostage. To save her life, he has bent the knee and served the sorcerer, though his heart remains true to the safety of the 7 kingdoms. It was he, while carrying out a mission for the sorcerer, who risked all to slip this message out, tidings that may well decide the fate of the realm. Tisk, 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 heart set on the 7 kingdoms. Renly shook his head, disbelief written across his handsome face. What a shining, noble, heart-stirring excuse. Let's see, who might this poor, exiled knight, forced to serve a sorcerer be? Aha! His eyes suddenly lit with realization, sharp and clear as they fixed on Varys. Could it be that fellow from the north last year? The one who dared to traffic slaves, was sentenced to death by the upright Lord Eddard Stark of Winterfell, and then fled in panic. The sickly sweet smile on Varys's face didn't falter. If anything, it seemed as though he had been waiting for this very question. The great lord truly lives up to his station as keeper of the realm's laws. You guessed correctly. He admitted openly. My source is none other than the former lord of Bear Island, Ser Jorah Mormont. Great Lord Jon Arryn felt a headache rising. Cutting off the argument before it could flare again, he asked the most pressing question, the very one Grand Maester Pycelle had raised earlier. Varys, did Ser Jorah say what this Easterner's true intentions are? This was the real danger the small council had to guard against. Worry deepened on Varys's face. He nodded heavily, his voice grave. That, my lord Hand, is precisely the intelligence Ser Jorah risked his life to deliver. He swept his gaze across the chamber, speaking each word with deliberate weight. That Eastern sorcerer seeks to emulate the Ninnapenny kings. His ambition is to use the stepstones as a foothold, gather his strength, then invade and conquer the continent of Westeros beneath our feet. Great Lord Arryn's face went ashen. 5 million gold dragons in debt already pressed upon him like a mountain. Now a powerful eastern force had appeared in the narrow sea, right at their doorstep, and their goal was to conquer the Seven Kingdoms. It was misfortune upon misfortune, disaster upon disaster. Grand Maester Pycelle spoke again, his voice trembling as he clutched at a thread of hope. My lord, perhaps your source is mistaken. Or forced into delivering false information. Varys instantly returned to his look of absolute certainty. Grand Maester, I cannot believe Ser Jorah would dare deceive the small council in so grave a matter. He is, after all, a knight personally anointed with holy oil and raised to his station by our King Robert himself. Stannis, who had been silent until now, broke the tense quiet with a cold laugh. A knight. A traitor who sold slaves for coin and trampled the laws of the Seven Kingdoms in broad daylight. Such a man speaks of honor. The swirl of arguments, doubts, mockery, and the chilling talk of invasion left Jon Arryn drained, his thoughts tangled into knots. He pressed his throbbing temples and made his decision. Enough. The hand's voice rang with a commanding authority that brooked no dissent, silencing the chamber. This matter is of the utmost importance. I shall report it to His Majesty the King when the time is right. He turned to Varys, his command sharp and clear. Varys, use every channel at your disposal to monitor the stepstones. Pay close attention to the struggle between that eastern sorcerer and Salladhor Saan. I want the results at once. Until then. His weary gaze swept across the council. Further discussion is suspended. This meeting is adjourned. Varys bowed slightly, that sickly sweet smile once more curling across his lips. As you command, my lord hand.